Hi, I'm Daryl Ehrlich here at Wilson Marine, and today I'm here to help familiarize you with your new Yamaha outboard motor. We have here on a pontoon boat a Yamaha 115 4-stroke. It is water cooled. The way that works is water is going to come in through these passages. On each side there's an intake like this. It gets sucked up into the motor, up into the power head, cools it, and then is just discharged through the prop with the exhaust. Now, some of the water is going to spray out on this little port here. We call it a telltale. So when the engine's running, there should be a stream of water continuously coming out the side of the motor. One of the first things you want to check for when you start the motor is to verify that you see that water. It's your indicator that you have cooling water doing its thing in the motor. These intake ports always need to be submerged in water when this motor is running. Never ever start the motor dry. If you do that, it's going to burn up the water intake impeller. Over on this side is a flushing device. I want to point this out. Over time, if you're operating in sandy, mucky water with vegetation, shallow canals, that sort of thing, over time you're going to suck in contaminants, and they can settle out in the cooling passages of the motor. If and when that happens, it's going to impact the cooling performance of your motor. So the intent of this is to flush those out. Now, without the motor running, you simply unscrew this device and put a garden hose on here, turn it on maybe half pressure, and let this run 10 to 15 minutes. That will flush out sediment and contaminants from your cooling system. When you're done, simply just screw this back on the base. It doesn't have to be crazy tight, just get it snug. Like that. Also on this side of the motor is your tilt trim switch, right there. I don't have battery power on this motor, so it's not actually operating right now, but you've got a tilt trim switch here, and there's a similar one on the throttle control handle. We're going to go ahead and pull the hood off, and I'll cover a couple things underneath here. This particular motor has a latch in the rear and one in the front. Release those and lift straight up. And you want to put your hood down in a safe place where it's not going to fall on the ground and get scratched. Just going to set it over here. I want to point out engine oil. You want to check engine oil every day that you use the boat. So they, from the manufacturer, they color code engine oil yellow. So here's your dipstick. And engine oil fill is here. Again, yellow. And I want to point up on top, if you come in and focus here, this little placard. Good. This little placard just calls out the engine oil type. So we recommend staying with manufacturer's oil. So in this case, Yamaha, their 4-stroke oil is called 4M. And we fill them when they come to us with the 1030. So that's when it's going to be in it when you receive your boat, and that's what we recommend staying with. You want to stay with the manufacturer's engine oils. They're better formulated and suited for marine environment, for the high RPM, the high loads, the constant use around water. They're just simply better formulated for use in marine environment. So stick with the Yamaha oil. The other thing that's called out here is the quantity of oil that you would use in an oil change. So they call it with and without filter, the quantity of oil. On this side, we've got your oil filter is right there, and engine oil drain plug is on the back right here. There's a hex bolt you'll see in the back there. While we're over here, the other thing I want to point out is the fuse block. Come in and focus on this. There's a call out, shows what each fuse is. There's a main fuse, tilt trim fuse, and there are spares located inside this as well. Let me just open it up real quick. So there you go, there's a spare, these are spares, there's your main fuse, and again the call out's on the cover. Put that back on. And the last thing I want to point out is back over on this side of the motor is these motors actually have a fuel filter, small one here on the motor, and there's a water and fuel sensor in there. If you end up with water in your fuel and it gets back to the motor, there will be a tone set off at the helm to warn you that you have water and fuel. Now there's also a fuel filter going to be inside your boat. I'm not going to crawl in there, I just have a demonstration piece. But all Yamahas are going to have a cartridge fuel filter water separator like this mounted inside. And we can go ahead and throw the cover back on now. When that's done, just simply drop it straight down. There should be no gaps around the outside. Get it down flush and snap, snap. The other thing you always want to do is grab it, give it a good shake to make sure it's on tight. This motor is designed to run on regular pump fuel. So 87 octane and up to 10% ethanol, which is regular pump fuel. The motor is designed to run on that, can run on that, no problem. Ethanol can be a problem if you've got a load of fuel on board and you're just not using that boat a lot. Over time, given several months, maybe 2-3 months or more, if you have ethanol fuel on board, ethanol is hygroscopic, meaning it absorbs water from the atmosphere. What can happen over that period of time is the ethanol binds with the moisture, water, and separates out to the bottom of the tank. That ethanol and water mixture is very corrosive. It's not good for the fuel system components in the motor, and also the motor just isn't going to run very well on with that water and ethanol mixture. There are 3 ways to combat that. One is to just make sure you use the boat a lot. When you're running it a lot, the ethanol isn't an issue. It's not pulling enough water in to separate, and it just gets burned with the fuel the way it's supposed to. The second is to use recreational fuel that doesn't have any ethanol in it to begin with. And then the third is to use a stabilizer that's designed to help combat the phase separation. The other thing I should mention, if you did have fuel in this boat for long periods of time, you're going to have other issues other than phase separation. The fuel will become stale as well within 2 or 3 months. So if there's periods of time you're not using the boat or for winter storage, you'd want to have a conditioner for both phase separation and for stabilizing the fuel for winter storage. From a maintenance perspective, there's 3 areas that you need to be focused on. The first is engine oil, the second is lower unit gear lube, and the third is fuel system. Engine oil, basically very similar, all 3 of those as far as timing, is 100 hours or once per season you do an oil change. Now there is an exception to that, and that is the very first oil change Yamaha wants done sooner at 20 hours. That way you're getting the oil that was in the motor during the break-in period out sooner. So very first oil change 20 hours, and then after that 100 hours or once per season, whichever comes first. 100 hours is a lot of hours. Most people aren't going to put that many hours on in a season. Some will put more, but most won't. Basically it's going to be once per season. The other thing is to get it done at the end of the season. That way any trace amounts of water or contaminants in the oil, those get pulled out during storage, so you don't have any rust, corrosion, or freezing issues to worry about. Plus in the springtime, when you want to hit the water, your boat's ready to go. So that's engine oil. There's also gear lube in the lower unit down here, and it's the same thing. The first gear lube change at 20 hours, and then thereafter either 100 hours or once per season, whichever comes first. So that's gear lube. The last item is fuel. All Yamaha motors are going to come with a fuel filter / water separator, spin-on cartridge. It'll be inside the boat somewhere. This particular boat is a pontoon. It'd be located under one of the rear seats. If this is a runabout or fishing boat, it'd be near the rear of the boat in one of the compartments. Same thing with this. They recommend changing this seasonally, so at the end of the season also get a new fuel filter installed. So engine oil, gear lube, fuel filter. There is a break-in period on the motor. It's 10 hours total. The way it works is the first hour run no more than about half throttle, maybe 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. The second hour, up to 4,500 RPM, 3/4 throttle. You can go full throttle, but try to avoid that in that second hour. It's not going to hurt anything if you do, you just don't want to do it very often. And then the third phase for another 8 hours, full throttle's fine, engine speeds in your operating range, and if you go full throttle, just limit it to 5 minutes at a time. The other thing you'd want to do during that 10-hour period is to avoid long periods of idling the motor. It's best to break in this motor under various engine speeds and loads. As far as maintenance, there are a couple really good sources of info from Yamaha. The first one is this Maintenance Matters guide. It covers everything from engine oil to gear lube to fuel system requirements, propellers, performance, all kinds of good info in here. And it's actually a fairly good read, not quite as dry as your owner's manual is going to be, but that can be a good source of info as far as the maintenance. And you can actually go online and get a copy of this. You can either view it online or download a PDF. But if you go to YamahaOutboards.com under the maintenance section, this will be available, Maintenance Matters. Then, of course, there's always your owner's manual, which you'll get with the boat. Again, a lot of good info in there. I'd suggest if you want to read something first, go to this though. Okay, we've hopped up into the boat and I'm going to go over the throttle controls and starting the motor. We happen to be in a pontoon boat, but the same is going to apply whether you're in a runabout, a fishing boat, or a cruiser. They're all essentially the same. They just may be laid out a little bit different, but the principles are all identical. In order to start the motor, the shifter needs to be in the neutral position. If it's clutched in gear, the motor is not even going to crank, so you got to be in the neutral position. Safety lanyard has to be installed. If the safety lanyard is pulled, the ignition switch will allow the motor to crank, but it's not going to fire. The ignition's actually off at that point. So lanyard's got to be installed. Highly recommend that the captain actually use that, clip it to himself when he's running the boat. It's just a good reminder that anytime the captain leaves the helm to shut the motor off. So in order to start the motor, neutral, lanyard in, trim the motor down. You want the water intakes of the motor to be submerged, so the motor's got to be down, and turn the key and start. We're not in the water, we don't have a battery hooked up to this boat, so we're not actually going to start the motor. Let's just pretend it's running. So once the motor fires and it's running, first thing we want to do is look back and verify we have water flow out of the water telltale on the motor. That's just going to assure us that we have some cooling water going through the motor. So don't forget to do that. The other thing I want to point out is a feature on the throttle control called throttle only. There's a button on the side. You can press that in with your other hand, advance the throttle. What's happening is you've basically disengaged the shift cables, so the motor's not going to go into gear, but you can advance the throttle. This could be handy on a cold day when you want to warm up the engine a little bit before you go on a cruise. As soon as you return the throttle to the neutral position, that feature resets. Next time you move out of the neutral, you'll go into gear. So kind of a two-handed operation by design. The other thing I want to point out is when you shift forward and reverse, you don't want to do just a slow kind of maneuver like that. If you do, sometimes you can hear like a ratcheting sound of the motor trying to get into gear. Over time, that can cause undue wear on the outdrive. So what we want to do is give it a good positive shift. Find that shift point, get right to it. And then after that, you'll start to feel the throttle start to advance. So good positive shifting. The other thing you'll find, and this shifter doesn't have it, there may be a neutral interlock. It would be a red button underneath that you'd have to squeeze to get this out of the neutral position. So that's common on some other controls. Lastly is the trim switch. Like I said, we're in a pontoon boat. The trim angle isn't going to be as significant a factor as if you're in a runabout or a fishing boat or a cruiser. Then trim angle of the motor is going to be a much bigger deal. But basically, when you want to get a boat up on plane, you want to make sure your motor is trimmed all the way down. That's going to get you up on plane faster. So you'd be trimmed down, go ahead and hit the throttle, get up on plane, then move back to whatever your desired cruising speed is, and then at that point you'd be able to trim up the motor for optimal efficiency. What's happening is when you trim up the motor, you're raising the nose of the boat a little bit. You have less hull in the water, which equates to less drag. Your engine speed will pick up a little bit. The boat speed is going to pick up a little bit when you find that optimum trim angle. If you're trimmed up too high, nose of the boat up too high, you could start experiencing boat starting to porpoise. That'd be the front of the boat bouncing up and down. And also the other thing you could experience is ventilating the prop, basically sucking air from above the prop because the prop's not in the water far enough. Those would be two indicators that you might be trimmed up too high and you'd need to trim down a little bit.